All right, welcome to the Teaching That Counts podcast. Once again, I am the host, Abel Maesis. I am an instructional coach here at Ceres Unified School District. So we are looking today, we're going to talk about chapters 10 and 11 in Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics by Peter Liljedahl. Once again, I have a great group of teachers with me today, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves, starting with my left.
My name is Sarah Mucha. I'm a math teacher at Central Valley High School.
My name is Elvis Liliado. I'm a math teacher at Ceres High School.
Diana Andrade, math teacher at Argus High School.
Well, welcome again to our discussion, guys. Thank you for joining me. And every time we meet, I think I learn something new, and I think our discussions have just gotten richer and richer and richer. So I'm excited to jump into these two chapters. The first chapter is on how we consolidate a lesson in the thinking classroom. So just talking about the issue for everyone out there, it really is, how do we look at getting to a place where we're formalizing the learning and students are understanding the mathematics from the teacher end? In here, he puts the issue as something that he's seen a lot is really just now you try one tasks. So a lot of the consolidating that he sees in classes is really just teachers showing students how to do something, and what he calls that step-by-step procedure is consolidating from the top. And he talks about now how we do this in a thinking classroom is consolidating from the bottom. So let's just kind of dive in and talk about some of the things that really struck us as interesting, and as all conversations that we've had, how do you see this working in the classroom? I'll go and start with something that really struck out to me. So he talks about the problem, and, for many, many years, the now you try one task is, we think about the gradual release of responsibility model where it's, I do, you do, we do. That's pretty much it. It's the teacher doing the math, and the teacher consolidating the math as being, hey, this is where everyone needs to be. But he takes a different approach in this is what we're going to do is we're going to take where the students are and build from that. And that's what he means by consolidating from the bottom. And I know that the curriculum that we've been using and really the stuff that we've been talking about in the previous chapters really solidifies that for me in terms of how are we taking what the students are coming in with and building from the mathematics. A couple things that really struck out to me that I thought was really super powerful. He just kind of lays it out. He's the problem is that it doesn't work. It's straight up doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And he says if it did work, then we wouldn't have all these problems that we have in math, right? If the way that math was taught traditionally worked, then why are our scores so low? Why are students struggling in mathematics? Why is all of that happening? Well, it's not working. So the approach needs to be different. And so I thought that was a pretty powerful statement to make from the get-go.
So I really liked how there were pictures in the book of showing the 3 ways in which to consolidate from the bottom, because I was having a hard time envisioning how to loosely cluster my class when I'm explaining. And we're in my classroom right now, and it's a little cumbersome with all the desks. So I forced myself to do this today, and I forced students to okay, we're going to come over to this board. And I used a different color marker like he suggested in the book to highlight or box pieces that you wanted to highlight from students. And so I tried to strategically pick boards that were farther away because he did talk about you want them to walk. This is the whole point of it. So we walked to one side of the room, we talked about it, and instead of me having the students, I normally have the students' board, whoever wrote on the board, they explain, but I noticed how he said 50% of the kids zoned out, and I told my students this. I go, so we're switching this up today. I said, if I choose your board, you don't need to talk. You just listen to what other people have to say. Everyone else, talk with your partner. Why do you think they came up with this table? How did they get these Y values or whatever we were doing? And there was a lot more discussion. There was a lot more engagement. And then the only thing that's hard for my students is that organic conversation. So for students to feel that they can say, oh, well, I think that they did this. Well, I think they did this. So I'm still having to use some of those random selection tools, which I think is fine, but I would like for it to be more organic in my classroom. And I did like that. I told them, I'm going to be boxing some of your guys' work. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just means don't erase this because I want to draw attention to this. So then I'd box something and I'd walk away and they'd be like, well, do you think it's right or do you think it's wrong? Like they're all like looking around. And I also told them that why I liked the vertical whiteboards, because I had tried doing group work and having them sit at their desk, but I was like, I really didn't like when we did this, guys, and here's why. Because one, it was really difficult for me to know where each group was at in the problem set. And number two, when your group got stuck, you got stuck and you didn't know where else to turn. I said, so that's why the vertical whiteboards are nice. I can visually do a 360, know where everyone's at, and you can do a 360 or whatever and see what other people are doing to get unstuck. And so they all were kind of nodding their heads like, yeah, okay. So we did the first one at our table group and then we split up into vertical whiteboards. So yeah, the pictures helped with what that was supposed to look like.
I'd like to add going back to the problem that Abel mentioned. As I was reading the chapter, I was thinking about my first couple of years when I started teaching math. And I remember there was teachers who would say, you know what, this is the way we do things. I have my own strategy, and students have to do the problem the way I show them. Otherwise, they're not doing it correctly. And that really stuck to me for a while because it's like there's different ways of approaching your solution, especially when I started doing after-school tutoring, and teachers had their own method. And I was like, wait a minute, you're overthinking the step here. Like, you could have done a little shortcut maybe, or maybe you could have done something a little bit different before we jump into that next step. And so I was like, this is really nice chapter because it makes sense about consolidating the solution for students, because if they don't know those steps, they're going to get stuck and they're going to give up. But if they already have an idea what they know and just build on that, that's what really got me into. It's like, okay, let's figure this out, these levels of what they know, and see where they can go from there.
Yeah, I think it's important, and he lays that out nicely where, he describes, just meeting the students where they are, because if we show them, okay, this is the solution, like this is where I need you to be, or this is the max, right? Unless they're close to that, they have no way to access where they are to that top place where you need to take them. And that's there at the bottom of page 171, where it's too big of a cognitive jump. I also noted on the next page 172, about in the middle, where he said that students began to mistake being shown how to do it for learning. Or maybe they mistook, like, okay, well, I have it written down in my notes. Okay, now I know it. Like, now I got it. Okay, and I think that's, I've seen that happen where they might be on it and they're with you and they're answering everything and they're doing everything you ask them to do. And then when it comes time to perform, it's kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing, right? So they do have that misguidedness, I believe, when they think they know it because they're doing all the motions you expect of them, right?
The mimicking,
exactly. And I do, I appreciated his last take, because when we are implementing these things that he has suggested in this book, and by the way, I do appreciate how you said, hey, I read this and I tried it today, because I think we're all pulling things and doing it out of the fly from this book. And it's exciting, to try these things. But I have heard that before, like what he says down there, when students ask, when are you just going to go back to teaching us math? Right? I don't know if anybody else has had that question, but I have had that, like, why aren't you just giving us notes on this? Or, when are we going to, can you just show us how to do that? So I do have students, and obviously this kind of goes back to, a few years ago, because as I've read, and even as I got into the next chapter 11, I'm like, okay, yeah, I've been doing this. I got away from how I used to do it for several years, and I've been evolving. So some of the things I read in here, it's kind of like, okay, cool. I've evolved, I think, and this, but definitely a lot more to go. But I have heard that from students. When are you going to go back to just telling us how to do it or showing us how to do it?
Yeah, like those are stop thinking questions. I love how this really started to pull some stuff together. right? As you're talking, Sarah, I'm thinking, oh, that's chapter 5. Oh, that's chapter 6. like you're putting, it's kind of coming together now. Today I was in a class where I was teaching a lesson, a Math 2 lesson on, we were doing sine, cosine, and tangent. And we were going into the inverse ones. But at first, I had them solving the sides of a right triangle. And one group was finding the third side by using a cosine. And the other group was using Pythagorean theorem. And I didn't want to stop their thinking. They were on opposite sides of the room, but I didn't want to stop their thinking. I wanted to let that group finish that cosine before I started to consolidate and go over basically the formalized piece. And so then this is where it comes in with Elvis, where there was different ways to do it. But they came up with a different way. I didn't tell them, look, you could do this or you could do that. Then let's go over to this board, guys. So we went to this board, brought them over to one side. What did they do here to find this third side? And automatically the kid that did it wanted to say, no. I was like, no, you did the work. I want everyone else to think about what you did. And then I had them do the same thing. Talk to your partner, think about it. And then they say, they use the cosine to do it. And as I was asking them that, a couple other kids went and they looked over to their board and they looked at that board and they started comparing what they did with that. I said, okay, well, cosine, let's go over this other board. And then we walked all the way to the other side of the classroom and they walked all the way. What did they do here? And they started talking about the difference that you could do both things and still find it. And then I got the question. One kid asked the question, well, which one's better? That's a good question. Talk to your partner. What do you think? And then, so I turned it back to them, and there was so much great discussion with different ways to do something that I don't think that would have happened if I didn't give them the opportunity to do it. If I just said, look, guys, here are different ways to do it. Like, I just don't feel like they would have gotten as much out of that than what I saw today. So I loved this chapter, and I loved the pictures. The pictures were very helpful, especially when he talked about like the 3 different pictures and what they're used for. So when the teacher is just kind of doing the general discussion without writing anything down, that's like a big ideas moment. And then the second way, when the teacher is writing something down, everybody's kind of looking, that's another like, kind of big ideas moment. But the third one, where they're kind of all coming around and the teacher's using the student work, that really resonated. I've been doing that the last, I'd say, about 3 weeks. And it's pretty powerful when students see that you're using their work to do the explanation. Like, it's no longer my work. I'm not the one that's learning the math. I'm using your work to connect it to where we want to be. And I think that's what he speaks here when consolidating from the bottom. And I feel like it gives ownership to the students and validation to what they're bringing to the class. And so I love a lot of stuff in this book, but to see it in action is pretty impressive.
And going back to what I think you touched on at the beginning was how this ties in really well with our Open Up curriculum.
Yeah.
So, it's all sequenced in our teacher materials. It tells us what to look for, where to start. So it does fit really well with that process of consolidating from the bottom, I believe.
Yeah, I noticed in one section he talks about, I think it's on page 178, another refinement that increased thinking and engagement came from the careful selection and sequencing of what students would attend to during the consolidation. So that right there, that's one of the 5 practices for orchestrating discussion in mathematics that the Open Up curriculum is built upon, those 5 practices. So we talked about those and anticipating and those other things. So I saw that too. I think the part that, and I'm going to ask this question of you guys too, because I think the part that I struggled with in this was how to marry this with like learning intentions and success criteria that we use a lot in series, specifically on the part where it was, this is where you all need to be. But starting with where all you need to be, sometimes they can't make the cognitive jump and it's not as successful. And a lot of times we talk about that success criteria as, hey, this is where you need to be. So how do you guys see the consolidating from the bottom and the success criteria and learning intentions still kind of working together?
That's a really good question. I was going to say that. And I was thinking about it and going back to the success criteria, something that I've been thinking about it over and over is like it has to be language that students understand, first of all, because if they don't understand what they're learning or the language, they're already lost. I already lost them. So it has to be clear for them to say, okay, this is exactly what he means by success criteria, and I should be able to check this off, and this off. So when we do the consolidation, we look at what the student knows, and so can they already check off some of those things and then build up on those ideas? That's what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
How I look at it at an alternative site, right? Because I have a wide array of abilities and prior knowledge, and what we've been doing with the unit, the learning
intentions.
That's not the right word.
When we learning progression,
what we're rolling out, right? The
proficiency scales.
Thank you. I'm like, I have so many phrases swirling in my mind.
Right.
I couldn't pick the right one. The proficiency scales. So I have been sitting down with the students and, look like, okay, this is, what we need to do. We kind of work from that bottom up. So like, okay, this is where we're beginning, or this is, and so far I haven't found anybody that really doesn't have any of those prerequisite skills at all. Like they all have some foundational pieces, which is great because then that gives me an ability to build upon. But I, tell them, all right, well, we're working on this foundational level, and then, okay, our goal here is to be at the 3, right? The level 3 of where our target is, and focusing on one target like I am doing now in the systems unit. That really helps focus that in. So I see where that is kind of like maybe a little bit of, difficult for us to piece together. But when you were just talking about that now, I was relating it back to the proficiency scales. We're like, okay, we're going to start at the bottom and we're going to work our way up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. To add to that, because I know you were going to continue with this, but the gallery walks, right? We get to see the students work, and as we're walking around the classroom, students get to see progression of either their classmates or they're learning as well. Like, wait a minute, that's all I had to do in order to get to the next level. And I feel like that's them consolidating, like they're learning too. Like, oh, that's all I had to do.
Yeah.
It's very close to it.
Yeah, and I guess I'm going to answer my own question. Maybe the success criteria is kind of like how you're successful in meeting what we're learning about. Like, it's okay for them to know where they need to go, but we're utilizing where they're at and their mathematics to get them there. And I think that's the consolidation from the bottom. Not necessarily, look, here's how, you're going to be able to solve a triangle, right? You're going to be able to solve for the measures of an angle in a right triangle. And the way you do this is you use an inverse sign, and here's how you do it. Like, that's consolidating from the top. But then them knowing that at the end of the day, I'm going to be able to do this. And then throughout the task, we're utilizing their understanding to then get them to the place that they need to be. I think that's where the two come together. Yes. So I found this when I think I needed to read this twice, this chapter, because I got kind of lost in some of the wording. But it makes more sense to me now, I guess, as I'm talking it out.
Yeah, I did write down to the side on that bottom of page 178 where he was discussing the sequencing and the consolidation. Like for me, I'm like, okay, that's all on me, right? And you have to do that on the fly because you don't know what the students are gonna generate on their own. So, you have to kind of be on the fly with that. But I wrote out to the side, that is the most important part. That's the most important piece. And for me, that's kind of like the aha moment. So when you mention the kids going around are going, oh, aha, okay, I get that now. I call that aha moment. So it's like, what did I miss? Okay, now I see it. Okay. And I think to me, that's the most important thing.
Yes, I agree, because it's not coming out of me. It's not me telling them that this is the solution, it's the way they should solve it. But if they see examples from other classmates, they also have that knowledge of like, hey, he went this route, she went this route. it doesn't matter which route I take because they're all going to take me there.
Yeah, absolutely. So coming in and joining us is Mariana Sandoval. So she has something to say too.
So when you guys were talking right now, learning intention, success criteria, and how that kind of ties in, it reminded me about what we're doing with standards-based learning. And a big part of that piece is student investment. And so when I read that part about them really working out their problems on the whiteboard and then doing the gallery walk, it reminded me about how now the students, it's not so teacher-directed, but it's more student-centered. And so the students are actually doing the learning themselves, and they're able to assess kind of where they're at and their classmates are at. And it kind of shows that whole piece of like, they're providing the feedback, they're doing the assessment, and they're more invested in their learning. They want to know, they want to know the right answer. They want to know what they're going to hear because they're invested. So that tied really closely to me with what we're doing with standards-based learning.
Yeah, absolutely. That investment is key. So one last thing before we move on to the next chapter, I think the part that I wouldn't say struggled with, but was, I guess, the most eye-opening for something that I used to do all the time. And I think Sarah had mentioned this, was that last micro move. Do not let students present their own work. Like, I feel like it's always been, okay, you did great. Can you show us what you did? Like, it was always show us what you did. And then when he talked about that, students just turn them off. Like, they don't even listen to the other student. And we, as much as we want them to listen to the other student, we're the ones that have the authority, and they tend to kind of just listen to the teacher a little bit more. So the combination of using student work, but the teacher leading that and using the student work, I have already seen the engagement increase in the attention to other students' work rather than listening to another student talk. Plus, I think the other thing you said were, hey guys, I'm using your work. You don't have to do anything. That takes a ton of pressure off the student, right? To have to then present it to class. So I thought that was pretty interesting because it kind of goes against what I've been doing for so many years. Anybody want to comment on that before we move on to the next
I just
chapter?
want to add one more thing. So you were talking about how when you use the student work, the students feel like validated. One of the FAQs was saying it's perfectly okay for the teacher to add to their work, but it's not okay to erase their work, and that it, devalues their work and things like that. And I thought that was really important because I feel like sometimes when I'm working with a group, I'll just be like, well, I don't know about these values. And like, I'm so tempted to just like erase, but it's like, I need to remember that that's probably not the nicest feedback. So I thought that was really important. Like, you can add to it, but, or ask them, can I make adjustments to this? I thought that was good.
I've been doing vertical whiteboards for many years, and I would always erase their work. And now I feel bad. Like, man, I can't believe I did that. So when I'm doing it with students now, I ask them, like, is it okay if I erase this? Or, you did this here. What if you did this here? So I have to consciously think about it before I do it. So
I was just going to add, I'm going to try this with my computer science class. My students actually ended up developing their own kind of like personal webpage. And so instead of having students present their webpage to the class, I'm going to have the students just kind of like, hey, tell me what it is. What do you guys think they did here? Where do we go on to the next screen? Where can you click on? So maybe that will be a little enticing, and then use that in math later.
Yeah, I would love to hear how that goes with a different subject. So let's move on to chapter 11. Chapter 11. Oh, we've been waiting for this chapter, haven't we, Sarah?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we have.
We've been waiting for this. How students take notes in the thinking classroom. Very, very different than what we've been used to, especially since we all were math people and gone through math programs. So just a couple of things here. He talks about the issue being, the I write, you write notes. As in, this is what I'm doing, you write exactly what I'm doing, and then the students use it. As I read through this, he also talks about it just doesn't work. And for a multitude of reasons, but if we think about, I think the question that it just came down to me is, who's the notes for? Like, who's using them and why are they using them? Are the notes for the teacher? Because it reminded me of the homework issue. Like, are the students writing down all this stuff because the teacher's telling them to? In that case, they're doing it for the teacher. Or are they actually going to be using it later on? Well, when? Like, I don't know if students know how to use notes at home if they're doing homework. I don't think they do. We'd have to teach them that. Or are they using it on a test? And do they even know how to organize that? Or, where we really want to get them is using it because they are using the notes. They're the ones that are taking ownership of what's going on. So I thought that was pretty powerful. You talked about live notes and dead notes. I'm going to just say because I want you guys to chime in here, but the one part that really, really struck me out of all this whole chapter was when he talked about mathematics notes not being linear and organized. And I was like, that's totally true. When I'm graphing a graph, I have the graph and the table and the equation, and I'm like going back and forth. Remember what we did here? And I would think about the way that I would instruct something, and I swear I think I'd be on 2 different boards at one time. How is a student supposed to follow that later on? Like, okay, where did Mr. Maestas go? He went to that board and that board. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So I'm reflecting on that, and I'm thinking, you know what I should have done? I should just copy down those notes and post it on Google Classroom and say, here's the notes. But what are you taking out of it? And that may be what I would do now, but it just struck me like, yeah, mathematics isn't linear. Talk about linear equations, but learning it is not linear, that's for sure. What do you guys think about this chapter?
I'll start off. When I was reading this chapter, you know what remind me of, like when I was reading it, was Cornell notes for some reason. And I started thinking about back in high school when I was in 11th grade, my avid teacher said, you're going to learn how to use Cornell notes because all of you are expected to go to college and I want you to be successful. So that's the first thing I started thinking about, like, how do I introduce Cornell notes to my classroom? Because I don't want kids to be writing through the book, navigating every single page to find information that they probably already know. We're only looking for stuff they don't remember. And so I said, I'm going to print out Cornell notes for them, and I want them to write 2 things on the note side, a question or 2 questions referring back to their notes, and then we ended up with a summary as a exit ticket. And that was the idea for today. And for some students, it worked really well. From other classes, we just ran out of times, but keep trying it.
Yeah, and I think Cornell notes are one of an example of the organizational tools that he had talked about that 10th and 8th and 9th graders struggle with. Yes. Which you have 9th graders, so it made sense that they don't know what they're writing down or what they should write down.
Former avid teacher here. Yay! Yeah. I'm so proud of you. Definitely, right? Note taking. When I look back on my 22 years here teaching math, that was something I always did, and then I found the nonlinear way of presenting them also. But as I became an avid teacher, right, and learned more about the note-taking process and the Cornell notes, I would implement something very similar. And I would, we would number, okay, we're doing this, or like almost like steps. But, then again, are they doing them for you? Like, because they do mention in here at the end, like, don't grade them, don't check them. As soon as you do that, you're doing it for the teacher now,
right,
and not for them.
Yeah.
And also, when are they going to use them? So I evolved because I was a teacher that never let their students use notes on a test. But I have evolved, and now my kids can use their notes on any type of exam or test that they take. And I think that makes them value that more, right? Let's say he says 3 weeks from now, have them go back and ask them something that they could find in those notes, or if they took the right notes. So it is definitely a process. It struck me that 8th and 9th graders are the ones that need it the most. And if we think about that, right, that's probably the craziest, most unorganized time in any child's life.
Yeah, right? I got a son again.
So, and definitely. I do think, there is an importance and a need for that. We, as educators, I don't think we should not teach our kids how to take notes. I think that's very important part of our job. How we approach it is definitely what this chapter hits on. And I liked the phrase that, he uses. So it's not for me, it's for you. So
the future,
it's the future. Yeah. Notes to their future forgetful selves.
Right.
So I think that was kind of a key thing. And The graphic organizers, that's something I think we probably all have used or evolved from the traditional way, maybe to some type of way that they organize their notes. But yeah, definitely providing them the tools and the resources, format even, for them to add to whatever they want to document. How do you want to document your learning?
Yeah, I think that was powerful. Just to add to that, I told that to my students today, like, you're going to be able to use your Cornell notes on the next quiz. Sorry, no book, but you can use your Cornell notes. And your kids were like, all right, I'm going to write down my notes. So that was powerful.
Yeah.
I, again, liked the pictures. I'm apparently a picture book person. Some of these look a little unrealistic, let's be real. The type 2, those notes look so neat. I don't know. I'm a little skeptical. But I did, so I appreciated that there were more than one type of notes that the graphic organizers that they showed. The thing that they all had in common was the amount of space that you give students, trying to make that a smaller space. And I think that, you know, my students have done a lot of mimicking with the note taking, but that's because that's how, when I was in school, it was not that long ago, guys, it was like that too. So I think that I needed to reframe, what does it mean? What do notes look like, and why are we doing them? I started out with having my students reflect on the learning targets after each lesson, and then I noticed that their reflections weren't very meaningful. So then I changed that document a little bit, and I renamed it, what he said, the notes to your future forgetful self. And then we had ski week, and I had them come back to the notes, and they didn't make sense to them. So then I'm like, okay, they need a lot more scaffolding. So I adopted the 4th graphic organizer that they show. And so only mine has 3 boxes. So they're going to have vocabulary, definition, big idea, or concepts, whatever they choose for that lesson, whatever that was. In the middle, they had their example, and then the last box was procedures. So after I consolidated, then I talked about what are some good things that we could put on in this box. Well, this is something new, so this is probably what I would want to put, and here's what I would put in this box, and things like that. The only thing that I'm not very good at yet is the annotating, and I think for that I would need to have an example like pre-printed, and that's maybe more direct instruction how to annotate your notes. But I do think that is one of the 3 important things that he talks about: the creation, annotation, and the selection. So that's what I grabbed from this chapter.
I can see this chapter definitely being something that you would do for the first 3 weeks in your class to really get them to know how to do it. And then as you go along, they'll be able to take ownership of their future forgetful selves. But especially for 9th graders, they don't know what examples to put on. They don't know what vocabulary you'd have to show them at first.
In the FAQs, it does talk about, after they do their meaningful notes, then have them go back into random groups, and on the vertical whiteboards come up with, those meaningful notes. So then it's around the room, we can talk about it, like then having students go around with 3 sticky notes and putting it on parts of people's vertical whiteboards that were most meaningful, like what's going to help you the most on the test, and have a discussion around that. So I feel like that's a really impactful activity, and I want to do that. But like you said, I keep running out of time because I want to get they're so into the math on the vertical whiteboards, and I'm like, oh, these 2 groups are doing 2 different things. Oh, but we only have 2 minutes left, and I have to get them back, and I got to make sure I have all my laminated cards, and I got to make sure everything's cleaned up. So that's the part that's been the hardest, is the time management piece. And I'm starting at the bell. It's just like he says in the book, give them 10 minutes to do these notes. And I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, 10 minutes, that cuts in a lot of time for them to be, talking and rotating around the room and all these things that I want to do. It's like, can we just have a block schedule already?
Yeah, the lesson I taught 75-minute class, and it was enough time. It was enough time. And the kids, I could tell, were starting to get drained because they were bell to bell. They were thinking, and they were doing some math.
I was just going to say that I just appreciate this chapter because I was one of those students. It said earlier in the book that, in the chapter, that it was difficult. It's difficult for some students based on the survey that they did regarding, like, I write I write, you write classroom. It said 14% of the students did not take notes at all. Most commonly, they said because it was difficult to take notes and listen at the same time, and they would rather listen. And to be honest, like me going to school, even to college, it was difficult for me to be able to write everything down and listen at the same time. So I would prefer to listen, but then I would be missing the notes. And then whenever I got home and I really needed to look back and study, I was like, oh gosh, like I don't remember the forgetfulness that came. So I just really appreciate this chapter even addressing it, because I think that that's huge for a lot of our students. They go through that, and a lot of the ways of how we taught, how we were taught, are things that we bring into how we teach that we don't even realize. And I just hear you guys talking about this, and it just makes me think of how important it is, like the book says, to teach how to do something. And sometimes we just need to take the time to teach them how to do it. I was never taught that, so I had to learn on my own. And I'm learning a lot just by this book study and just listening to what you guys have to say on ways I can even, as myself, I'm still taking notes in professional learning, and this is still happening, in my world. Like, how can we be better at that in general?
Yeah, think about the power of this at the beginning of the year in 9th grade, and really spending the time to do that. And then by the time they're in 10th grade and 11th grade, they've got the ability to go, I'm going to pay attention, and I'm going to do some math today, and then I'm going to write down the things I know that I'm going to need. Like, that's a life lesson later on. I want to address, I guess it's not really an elephant in the room, but it's something that I know that I did, and I know that a lot of people do, and it's the issue of guided notes. And I feel like I'm going to offend some people here when I say this. I don't know if anybody who's listening to this podcast, he talks about he actually calls them fill in the blank notes, but basically it's guided notes. And he says, although it's true that students spent much less time writing and they did not fall behind, very few students, 35%, actually spent time listening. And then, in fact, many of the students were observed to not be listening at all and only copying what their neighbors wrote down in the blanks. So I use guided notes a lot too. And I feel like I think that we say guided notes because they're organized and they're less writing, which is true. Obviously, that's what kids do. But there's no listening going on. And there's no thinking. And there's no autonomy. So,
it's just another checkbox. Like, I need to get this done. Like, I'm going to check it off, Real quick, going back to the study skill part, I think because we're high school teachers, we have this mindset like, well, students should know how to take notes, And it's like, they don't. So, because if you think about it, where do they learn how to take notes? They don't. It's just the copying part, the mimicking. So,
yeah.
But yeah, the guided notes, the only time I would do guided notes is if it was a word problem. And now I'm thinking like, well, was that even the right choice? Like, to have it printed on the paper for them? I mean, I guess if you want them to annotate and do an activity where they're picking out the key information, like those types of things, I think it's good to have things pre-printed. But I don't think that guided notes are setting students up for success for higher education, because your professor is most likely not going to give you guided notes. They're going to keep talking and talking and talking. And I mean, obviously we know that that's not the best way to learn, but that's what some professors are going to do. And you got to play the game. So
yeah, when I was in college, we had a professor. She was so fast. She lectured, I swear, she lectured 2-hour lecture in 1 hour. And she used all the boards in the front and the back. And I stopped writing. I was like, there's no way I'm going to write all this stuff down. So I stopped writing. I just listened. And every once in a while, I'm like, I'll take that down. I feel like I did this because she was just going too fast. And a friend of mine, he always took every single thing down. Like, that was his method. And he spent so much time trying to catch up to her. Long story short, I got an A in the class. He got a D in the class. And I'm not saying that was the reason, but it's hard to learn when all you're doing is writing and you're not listening at anything that's going on, because you're trying so hard to write down the stuff. And then what happens when you go home and you're trying to do homework? You have no idea what the heck you just wrote down because you couldn't listen. And I think that's the point of this whole thing so far that we've been talking about, is who's doing the math. Who is doing the math and who's learning the math? And I think that's the most important question, as we found out through this whole book study, right? So we've talked about so much stuff, guys. I think we're about ready here to wrap up. Is there anything last on your mind that you want to say before we close out?
Just going back to your point about guided notes, I do agree with what you're saying, but I think part of it too is like those guided notes, the way I always took them was for students who needed that extra support. It should have been for the whole class. It should only be for those students who actually need the support.
Yeah.
It should not be for every student.
And like sentence frames, right?
Yes.
Like sentence frames are great. Can we make sentence frames a thinking activity so that students are having more ownership of that sentence frame? I think that's the way that I'm thinking now. Is like all those tools, all those EL tools, all those things. Can we make them a thinking activity so that students are doing the thinking and then we're consolidating that information? I don't know. I guess I do know. That's my wonder and my hope. I think we can do that.
I had a curriculum one time that had the guided notes, and it was horrid. Like, I was like, nope, not doing it. I think I, maybe started out, and like he said, the kids just listen for the one word that they got to put in the blank, and then they tune you out for the, until they hear the next word, or what was that? What am I supposed to put here? So that I was never a fan of guided notes or fill in the blank notes at all. I wanted to go back to what you had mentioned regarding college, and if we are preparing students to go on, that is something that as high school teachers, right, we do need to equip them with that ability to take notes. So if, even just in the last 3 years since the pandemic, that college course has changed so much. And I have my daughter in college, and I see some of the struggles she has with maybe, things that are online, and maybe all the information's online and she doesn't know where to begin. And so, we kind of have to think about, we don't want to inundate our math class with note-taking, but it is something we have to balance and make sure that we are teaching them to make those meaningful notes for them. And then one other thing I wanted to mention, and go back to what Sarah had said about the time issue, because I've run into that too, and actually what I'm doing right now in my class, it has been over the course of 3 days. So how do I do that, like on the vertical whiteboards? And then it's like, okay, guys, class is over. And then the next day, I can't recreate that on the vertical whiteboards. And then also graphing is difficult. So I just wanted to throw that out and just kind of maybe see if anybody had anything to add to that.
Yeah. So first, those of you that are listening, thank you for sticking to this one. This is, I think, the longest podcast we've done, but there's so much good information that we've talked about. I would say, and he talked about taking a picture of the whiteboards, but I did something this last time is I took a picture of the whiteboard and of two different groups' solutions, and then I used it the next day and put it on my slide presentation, and I asked the students, which one is right? Go ahead and talk to your partner about which one do you think is right and why? And I used that as a thinking activity. So I brought back the information that they were doing the previous day. So I think maybe as a teacher, you take a picture, upload it to a slide presentation, and then the next day, look, hey, this is what you guys had written last time. Where can we start building from that again? So that seemed to work out pretty good.
The graphing is hard. I was in a sketching unit, and I was like, okay, and now we're transforming functions. So I'm giving them piecewise functions that they have to transform. And I just have to be okay with that. It doesn't always look pretty, but they have the concept. They're just doing, XY axis with tick marks, and they're trying their best. So yeah, they're ugly, but
which is a good skill to have, by the way. It is a good skill to be able to draw something from freehand, to be able to sketch a parabola or sketch a line, right? So I think that's building up their math proficiency in that. So we can talk forever, but I know that I don't want to make the podcast too long. Next time we talk, we're going to talk about how are we evaluating students in a thinking classroom, and what type of assessments, informative assessments, are we using. So we're coming close to the end. We're going to be talking. We only have 3 more practices left, and then we're done. So those of you out there, come back, join us next time where we talk about those two. Thank you again for joining me today. Again, always a great discussion. So thanks a lot, and we'll hear you next time.